we share words about Jesus and his relationship with women, which was unique.
Our view of women, more than other cultures in the day, but it was still pretty bad. Women were not afforded the same freedoms and rights as men. Maybe the biggest disadvantage Jewish women had was not being allowed into the inner courts of the temple. The temple was not just a place of worship, it was a social gathering. This kept women on the edge of society and denied them access to teaching and opportunities to move up the social rankings. I'm free. Okay, I'm free. The world Jesus entered largely discriminated against women. He rejected the false criteria upon which the double standard was built. He measured men and women by the same standards, the inequalities of character, and not just by such accidents of birth, ethnicity, and sexual differences. He affirmed women by his manner, example, and teachings. Jesus included women where Jewish piety largely excluded them. Women were excluded from participation in synagogue worship. They were restricted to a spectator role and forbidden to enter the temple beyond the court of women. My husband enjoyed this next sentence. A woman was not to touch the scriptures lest she defiled them. A man was not to talk much with women, even his wife. Talk with women in public was yet even more restrictive. Oh, God forbid. My husband laughed at that.
And we should note that these extreme views that Joe shared were not part of God's plan. Rather, they were harmful interpretations that humans instituted, and we still do that today. We knew this wasn't God's intent for women because when Jesus entered this world, he challenged many of the customs that put woman below man. Not only did he challenge the current status quo, he also elevated women in his ministry in ways that were unheard of back in that day. Jesus placed value and gave a voice to women. I got to share this because it kind of has to do with the women. When Tom and I got married 40 some odd years ago, my church had probably one of the first women pastors out there. And it was a United Methodist church. It was right after the time the United Brethren and the United Methodist merged. So she was the first one. She's the first one in my little town, and probably one of the first in everywhere. And one of Tom's uncles, who was a very strong United Methodist, said to him, said to his brother, is this going to be okay? Because she's a woman. So I kind of think back on that and chuckle. Because, Jesus elevated women, and they were elevated back then. Why not today? The place of women in the first century Roman world and in Judaism has been well documented. Most frequently, women were regarded as second-class citizens. Jesus' regard for women was much different from that of his contemporaries. His approach to women was very revolutionary for that time. But was his treatment of women out of character with the Old Testament revelation or with the later New Testament practices? Early writings by the Apostle Paul and those who followed him seem to place the role of women in more Old Testament views. So it almost sounds like, Paul was kind of taking things a little backwards, okay? We know that women played a dominant role in the life and ministry of Jesus. We also know that in the early church, the important role of women seemed to be diminished, and the role of men took the authority positions. And that has lasted for a very long time. So we see changes coming today, and we see more women coming into the ministry. We see more women coming into other places where men have typically held the lead. And it's kind of nice to see that, even though it's been slow, but it's moving onward.